Hi, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Spiritual Scientist. I'm Victor Hamza. Hey, thanks for checking me out. I thought I'd talk today about the ego. So, I get on a lot of forums and a lot of people are talking about the ego. And it's like almost like a swear word within more of an awakened community. And people are saying, oh, you have such a bad ego. You have this ego. You have that ego. And I thought I'd break it down a little bit to let people understand more about what the ego is, what's its function, and why everybody's misappropriating that word. So to get right to it, I'll take this right from the internet, a psychoanalysis of the word ego, what it really is. The part of the mind that mediates, the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious, and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. So, what happens is, with a lot of people, what they do is, you have an ego. So, your ego, as when you're a younger person, is tied into, it's not fully formulated, your sense of identity. And so, when you're a child, you have this. You identify with an object and you think that that object is part of you. And so when that object is, we give like a present to a little kid, they say, oh, that's, they feel like that's part of their identity. And then when that identity is taken away, they have a sense of loss of that identity. You take a kid's toy away and they cry all the time. It ends up being that too later in life. People have misidentified a lot of things, like in their world when they self-identify with money and fame and all these other things, that they feel like that's their part of their identity. What happens is when you have that sense of loss, when something, for instance, taken from you, that your ego, that is sense of self-esteem or self-importance. But if we go back into this, it says it's really what's mediates between the conscious and unconscious, responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. So it's very important to have an ego, which is a point of view. So people say you got to lose your ego. What they really should be saying is you have to lose your point of your conscious awareness of your egoic structure, which is structured around your feeling of loss, and you're overcompensating. But people say, ego, that's one aspect of it. So when you have a sense of loss, something like that toy being taken away, people overcompensate. And the mind, being part of this whole process, is overcompensating. So, use the extreme example, someone, the billionaire, let's say Trump, so for instance, just saying that I read his book, The Art of the Deal, and within it, to go through it maybe once a day or once in a while to cheer himself up, he'll read letters that people have written to him stating how great he is and how much he's helped them, and he'll read that over to himself. Like, a lot of that can be negative. Self-aggrandizement is not so great a thing as well. The meek shall inherit the earth, so there's something big to that. So the more that you're empathizing, and what that is like in tune with other people, the more your circle actually is widening, even if there's different levels to it. So when you're coming from the first chakra, second chakra, third chakra, you would think, hey, it's all survival, it's all this, and it's all that. I need. And when you get up to the higher chakras and you get up to that, mindset, you'll understand that it's more giving and then you'll understand more, and then your circle's actually widening instead of smalling. That's when people say, "Oh, you're so selfish." They're looking at you like you're narrow-minded. From everybody else's point of view, you're like this, but from your point of view, you're like, "Yeah, everything's mine." But it's the opposite, right? So it's that point of view. It's that invisible circle on the sands of our reality. So everybody draws that circle. They say, "That's me," and then in MK Ultra Mind Control, the opposite happens, and they break that circle down and they try to make that circle around what they want. So, for instance, I made a meme up and I posted on social media, and it was the Full Metal Jacket. If you haven't seen that movie, it's a little rough. But within it, they do the Rifleman's Code, which was written by a Marine general after Pearl Harbor. And within it says, "I am my rifle, this one is mine." So he's identifying with his rifle. So I used that formula of that as a meme to get the general sense across, which was lost on a lot of people. But what identifying your identity with a tool used for killing is certainly a bad thing. And that is an extreme example of mind control that is set up to actually propagate war and killing and everything to for a certain goal for people who are in control and ultimately aren't putting their lives on the line. They're just sending out soldiers to do whatever they're saying, so they could just sit back and reap the rewards. So that's certainly an extreme example, but is an example of the ego and how it can be broken down for nefarious means. There's actually it's horrible. I've heard these stories where they can take all the way down to the womb, and they'll try to break down in the womb an ego. You can have identification all that way, and they use sound modifications, and they'll try to fragment the ego of the fetus. So when the fetus is born, it's more readily, believe it or not, I've heard these stories. So what in mind control programs, what they'll do is they'll fragment the ego. So they'll through trauma, they'll split the personality and then split it, and then that other personality will be called an alter. So that alter personality will be a separate personality and then they have separate within that, they'll fragment it for control for someone else's purposes. For instance, there's within that there's alpha, there's beta, you're a beta personality, and delta. And then delta would be the warrior, and then of course we have delta force. We actually have in the military, there's a term, delta force, which is coined in a way from MK Ultra Mind Control. You're actually making these mind controlled warriors to go out and do certain things. Now, someone watching this who's in Delta Force or whatever saying, "I'm not mind controlled." Okay, I understand what you're saying. I'm also saying that along the line somewhere, you've taken up a creed to do something where maybe it wasn't your. If you were left to your own druthers, I don't think you'd be doing what you're doing. But with all that said, so there's certain levels to the ego, and extreme examples are governmental programs. There's other people that are fragmenting other people, and they're doing that. Now we have another example of mind control. It's what's happening is that certain gurus or spiritual teachers that will use spirituality as a form of mind control. So they'll say that you need to meditate, and instead of and break that ego and break that ego and break that ego, and they're trying to break down the ego of people in saying that all of the ego is bad. You should not have an awareness of self at all, and breaking that down and then make them like a slave and worshiping the guru or worshiping that religious dogma institution or whatever, and using them for their purposes. For instance, I'm well aware that there's they break down these like monks, and they make them like they'll make them like cook, clean and do the yard or whatever, and make them like drones and just make them do this all the time and serve their needs. There's Scientology, there's all these kind of things that break people's egos down, and they want to control them. It's all about control and sending them out to do their bidding. So there's many things about the ego that are misunderstood. The ego itself is not to have an identity. For reality testing, and sense of personal identity is not a bad thing. When you're coming in contact with higher spiritual consciousness, if you don't have a sense of personal identity, you're not called to be a drone. That's evil. So being a drone in a hive mind is not the highest level of spiritual consciousness. That would go from 0 to 100 miles an hour to back to 0 real fast. So I just thought I'd talk about the ego and what the ego is. Within the symbol Om, there's within, it looks like a 3, and within that you have conscious awakening, of being awake, consciousness. You have a sleep. Then there's a dream state. Then then you have there's another state which would be more towards enlightenment, and that would be like there's a little dot above it, which is the awakening of consciousness at that point. So there's 4 different states within that symbol, what they're talking about. So you go from your sleep, the dreaming state. You have the dreaming state. You have basically sleep where you're not dreaming at all. You have sleep, dreaming state. You have awakening. Then you have enlightenment. So those kind of states, within that, if you get to that point where enlightenment, and you're trying to get to that state, but what they're doing is they're trying to break you down to make you unconscious at the same time. So that's not, a good thing. So I just thought I'd talk about the little bit of the metaphysical aspects of ego, and part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious mind, and is responsible for reality testing. So your being, that your awareness of being, is not a bad thing. To have an idea and point of self. Now, within that, to having a noble truth to go beyond yourself for compassion. That's what in meditation we're working on. You do chants and meditation. You're building up your willpower with your identity to build up that willpower so you could let go of negative aspects and move towards more of the positive aspects within your identity. And you're also, building up that compassion, of course. And when you're ready for it, you build up to that super consciousness, that part that Friedrich Nietzsche talked about, which would be the Uberman. A lot of people don't know that Superman, the idea for it was drawn from Friedrich Nietzsche, his ideas for the Uberman. And a lot of, unfortunately, Nazism was drawn from Nietzsche as well, in an aspect of that being that there was the Germans were thinking that there was a perfect person. The idea behind it is that you're working on your consciousness to let go of the negative aspects and grab onto the positive aspects and overcoming. The Uberman was the one who overcomes all those negative aspects and gets into a higher state. Now, Nietzsche talked a lot about nihilism, which is, basically into the chaos aspect of nothingness, and within the nothingness to grasp something. So they were searching for it, but they didn't get there. And he was trying to describe, and he was on the edge of it, and a lot of it's true, but he was always talking about in the void, in coming into contact with, enlightenment, but they're kind of missing steps. And hence, Nazism was set up for a downfall from the beginning, because it didn't have those. And I'm not saying that the certain ideas of being a better person are not bad ideas, was taken to an extreme, and then not having the realization about the steps and how to get there and the right way to be and act within that. That's the negative part of it. So, a lot of this has been misconstrued over the years by a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different genres, a lot of different religions have looked at the ego and are, now we have, there's Elon Musk and talking about having brain implants, and people are starting to have the conversation about technology and being a drone, in actuality being a brain hooked up to a computer. I just saw something having you looked at. You have new neurons that they could grow in a test tube, and then they could grow those into a computer. And where is this leading to, and all that. So there's certain futurists that are under Ray Kurzweil, with under the singularity isms and singularity people that are more interested in transhumanism, and getting from Ray Kurzweil, who's works at Google now, 161 patents. What he's proposes merging man and machine, to go into transhumanism, because they're saying that the computer's gonna pass us by anyway. Might as well try to grab onto it before it's gone. So that transhumanism agenda is there, and what they're trying to do is take a shortcut to enlightenment, and they're trying to do the old button hook run around, and they're trying to say, okay, we'll just get there because the computers will be great, blah blah blah, and so quick thinking and blah, it'll be so smart. They're so smart. They're so fast. What they don't realize, it doesn't matter how fast you think. It matters what you think. It doesn't matter how much, how quickly you're processing. It matters more what you're processing, how you're conceiving it. And a lot of people have always been talking about They don't think robots can have feelings and all this other stuff. So it gets very, complicated in that aspect but to bring it back to the ego, the ego is the center of your identity within your reflection of what you are in proportion to what the universe is. When you're mentally prepared as a spiritual practitioner through meditation, through chants, through deep introspectiveness, at that point, you're able to grasp more of what's ungraspable, and then understand, having a level of transcendence for more of an awakening of consciousness, that you're getting into that higher state. What Nietzsche was talking about a little bit was the Ubermind, the overmind, the universal consciousness. So within universal consciousness, having an ego, what a lot of people who don't have universal consciousness would reflect on, saying having an ego is evil, it's bad, it's this or that. Having an ego aspect, but having a correct one, is not bad when you confront the super consciousness at that point. When you're involved in the super consciousness, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, because you're allowed your point of view, you're allowed your field of space. There's different aspects within it. So for instance, I could be thinking about a subject for 20 years, and you could be thinking about a subject for 20 seconds. So we have different points of view depending on experience. There's also, aspects to that. So having a different point of view from experience, from an experiential point of view within that, is not negative. But yet when you talk to spiritual people online, especially, I found that, they'll say, oh, like I'm excited to share something. So I'll say, oh, that's great. I've been meditating since I was 4 years old, 6 years old. I've been meditating. And then, people say, oh, you're very egotistical. I'm like, excuse me? Like, yeah, just to say that to somebody? Meanwhile, I'm excited to share. That's the reason I'm saying it, would be I'm excited to share. I'm being totally open, being myself, and say, oh, I've been meditating for a long time, to show that I'm very enthusiastic. But from their point of view, they're saying, this guy's full of himself, and all he thinks about is himself. So there's certainly different ways to look at certain things. And if you're thinking that somebody's negative, then you have a negative, and they're not, then you have a negative, a lot of times you have a negative aspect within yourself that you're reflecting out. And it's you think you're getting a false positive. You think you're getting a positive, but it's a false positive. And the reason is because of that negative, cycle. So when I'm talking to somebody and they say, for instance, oh, I've been meditating since I'm 4 years old, I'd be like, that's awesome. Awesome. Me too. Wow. What do you, so that should be the, conversation. So it shouldn't be like, oh, I've been meditating since I'm a year. I'm like, that's awesome. Where'd you get to in your meditation practice? How'd you do this? How'd you do that? And it's a level of sharing. So that level of sharing, that aspect, that openness, leads to that, that higher state that I was talking about. But that being closed-minded, and that's certainly a lower level of that consciousness thinking. So I just thought I'd share some ideas about the ego, and that it shouldn't be used as a swear word. Having a strong ego is okay. Having an idea of good versus evil is okay. I don't believe that it's a good idea for people to keep saying in the spiritual community that we have to embrace our darkness. That's not really cool. Think about it. you know, to use Jesus as my guru, that's not what Jesus said, right? He didn't say embrace the darkness. He said, I'm a light, let go of that darkness. Bring the light out from yourself, be the light. So we have to, practice being the light. We have to bring the light from within our being out. We're not embracing darkness. I understand people are saying they're embracing the dark aspect of themselves. I believe in seeking forgiveness. I believe in forgiveness of sins. So I think that is more of a holistic way, because once you get into that, then your heart can actually open up, and then you can, come from the heart instead of embracing darkness, and then you're coming, more from your head, because you can't come from your heart embracing darkness. Okay? You can't. Even though you think you are, you're not. So all the people out there saying, I have to embrace my dark self, my shadow self. That's just propaganda from basically evil is out there building up that, so there's a lot of, it's amazing. So if people were talking about this 30 years ago, it'd be like, they're talking about embracing her dark self. What's up with that? They're crazy. But now it's so common that you see those kind of things. So we have to let go of that. I'm definitely not into that, and I don't think it's a good idea for that. Some other things like the what do you call it? That soul, twin soul, and all that. Everybody's always talking about. Oh, you're my twin soul. You're just setting yourself for failure. Two halves don't make a whole. You be a whole. You're looking for somebody else to be your other half. Two halves don't make a whole. They make two halves. So that's what I'm twin flame I'm talking about. I don't think the twin flame idea is a good one. I understand, love and its aspects and everything else what they're talking about. But every time I did a lot of therapy for people that came off of what they believed was a twin flame, and it flamed out. And if you really have a twin flame, why did it flame out? And then they say, there's a million reasons, blah, 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 blah. It always ends up being really bad. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope I said enough information for you to understand and take this within, aspect of yourself and use it, for goodness. We were talking about the ego, and I hope everybody has a great big ego, okay? In a good, positive way. Having an identity of self is okay. Having a knowledge of, good versus evil is okay. Understanding the boundaries between your conscious and subconscious mind is wonderful. So I certainly, am down with that idea. I'm also down with building up the willpower and using meditation and chants and all that to actually enhance the ego and finally get to a state of consciousness where you can let go of aspects of self in a positive manner, so you can identify with higher spiritual levels. So I am okay with that as well. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope somebody got something positive out of this. Like, subscribe, share. Love you guys. Peace out. Bye-bye.